Michelle, thank you so much for taking time to hop on the show and talk about the very sexy subject of tax credits, uh, which, people hear tax credits, tax incentives, tax rebates. They hear all of these sexy words all over, but you know. As production continues to become more and more globalized, I wanted to introduce you and help give us essentially just a quick overview, as quick as one could give it, of just how these credits work essentially for people that are new to this, but even for more established folks. Like I recently learned that GreenSlate has you as a department. And I was like, what? I've been here forever and I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, of course. Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting. And, one thing here at GreenSlate we like to do and I like to do is just share our knowledge and partner with
Yeah.
our clients and make sure that they're up to date with all their, payroll accounting and tax incentive needs. So, yeah, I mean, just quickly, quick overview. Production incentives are just a really great, valuable tool for filmmakers and producers to consider when putting together their project and their financing package. It should definitely be a factor for them in deciding where to film. Um, in a nutshell, it's a tax benefit that's offered by a state, country, or city to encourage production, in a particular state, city, or jurisdiction. And essentially, that's money right back into production's pocket after they meet certain thresholds, shoot in the location, and whatever that may be for that particular tax incentive.
So will you give us there's three types of incentives, really. Will you give us a quick overview of the three different types?
Of course. So the three main types would be rebates, refundable tax credits, and transferable tax credits. There's also grants, but those are very discretionary and generally given to particular projects that are filmed in certain locations and truly um, capturing like the soul, heart and soul of a particular location. So it's not usually available for every project type. But rebates, that would be a percentage of a production company's spending distributed to production company directly, generally after spending completes in the form of a check or wire to their bank account. So that is a nice, clean and easy way to get your money back after filming in a particular location. Refundable tax credits are tax credits that are issued to production that is tied to a tax filing. So, what this means is once you complete your spending in a particular location, your tax credit will be approved. You'll be given a tax credit certificate that you can then apply to your tax return to claim a refund. And the state will generally offset any liability you may have in the state, which for production is generally very little or none at all. So you will get that refund back in the form of a check after your tax return is processed and filed by the state. And then transferable tax credits are similar to tax credits where it is tied to a tax return filing. But in this case, the tax credit is not refundable and it has to be transferred to a high net worth individual or corporation in the state that has a tax liability. So basically, the state is saying, we don't want to give cash out, but we will give somebody the equivalent of what this tax incentive is worth to apply to their taxes. And one thing that's important to note with transferable tax credits is when you do transfer them or sell them to another taxpayer, generally you're selling it at a discount. So you want to make sure to take that into consideration when you're estimating how much money, or cashback production will ultimately get.
And each state that offers the transferable tax credit gets to set the price essentially, right? Of what how much you can sell it for.
Correct. So the state, they don't, some states have a very hard line of like, we will buy back your credit at this amount. Massachusetts, Louisiana, they'll buy it back at a very particular percentage. Other states, you can kind of play the market. So, depending on the time of year that your tax credit is becoming available, depending on the demand in the market, you may be able to get a slightly better price, within a few cents. Those being New Jersey or Georgia, that has kind of an open market where you can try to reach out to a few buyers and see who will give you, the best deal.
But typically, a producer or line producer would work with a broker to help sell this tax credit. The yes, the tax credit that is transferable. It's not something that you would have to figure out how to do on your own. And I have actually never sold a credit myself, but I've been a part of projects that have certainly been set up that way. And I would assume there's also a fee that a broker takes. So when you're making your budget, it's really important that you take all of these factors into consideration because depending on how that state is set up, to your point, it's not a one for one, and you don't want to, especially if you are super indie and every dollar really counts. I mean, it counts all the time, but when you're talking in that sub five space, it's like you're really counting those pennies,
Yeah.
So you don't want to get to a place where you really thought you were getting a million back and really it's like 750 when it's all said and done. And the other thing that I think is important to note is that when you do work within the tax credit system, whichever type, there is a post credit, a post accounting tax credit audit that happens. And so you can go in making a lot of assumptions about how much you think it's going to be anyway. But that state could also look at your books and end up qualifying you for less than you thought for a variety of reasons, like fun things. For example, many states don't allow Amazon purchases to
Mhm.
be included in that. If you're renting spaces for someone to live, accommodations, a lot of states don't allow Airbnb to be included in that. So all of a sudden, you may not have known these things and you think, great, I'm putting up my A-list talent. It's going to be 30K out of my budget, but you put them in an Airbnb and now that money won't qualify. So it's really important beyond understanding how the credits work in these different states, understanding the end of the pipeline as well, so that you are set up for success and you're making these decisions on the front end that are going to help you on the back end. And certainly a payroll company like GreenSlate and a great accountant will help you make sure that you're being set up for success because a lot of people have learned these lessons the hard way and now they pass them on to others.
Exactly. I mean, very well said. I mean, partnering with someone who's well versed in tax incentives is key to making sure you maximize your potential tax credit. Um, Not only that, but like you mentioned, brokers, working with people who have a network of contacts and resources who do this day in and day out makes it so much easier down the line for producers and filmmakers and whoever's, taking charge of that tax credit to have everything in place. So when you are ready to monetize, you can do so quickly, and timely.
Yes, and that's the other part is the timeline. I think that there
Mhm.
can be a misconception that because it's a tax credit, refund, rebate, whichever, it's like you're going to wrap production and you're going to get that money, and often that's not the case. A lot of productions have to have their tax incentive cash flowed by a financier or debt or equity, depending on how it's set up. And even if you have that, it could still be a long time. I know Georgia is pretty good because of the volume of production of turning around their incentives pretty quickly, but I've heard horror stories of things taking years sometimes. So again, you have 5 million, you really think, wow, a million is going to come right back into my pocket. Well, not really. First, you got to cash flow that 1 million of the credit, and then you have to wait until however long, and then that 1 million could not be the million, it could be the 750 against the film. So,
Right. Audits can be, very timely, especially depending on the organization and status of your backup and, what went on during production. But yes, it's key to pad your timing estimates, especially if the tax credit is leveraged to a loan, because you want to make
yeah.
sure that you can pay that back timely, that you're not hitting larger interest payments and, spreading it out properly.
Yeah, again, like, can't think of anything sexier to talk about, and people, again, may overlook this, but I think it's important to note because we hear often about the front end of these credits, and it's so exciting because we're like, "Oh, yeah, you just go to Georgia, you just go to New Mexico, it's so
Mhm.
easy, you just da da da," and it's like there's so much that really goes into doing these things properly, that I think it's important that you are informed as much as possible on the front end and that you find people that have been down that journey with you to really make sure, again, that you're set up for success because the last thing you want is to, have to have that conversation with your financier that you sort of like whoopsies, like accidentally, miscalculated by $1,000,000. So,
Yeah, I mean, knowledge is key and just awareness, for producers and filmmakers,
yeah,
making sure that your department heads are aware that you're going for a tax incentive, making sure your accounting team is aware so that they can do what they need to do upfront to make sure you have a smooth audit, to make sure that the costs you anticipate to be qualified will ultimately qualify. And yes, it's not fun and exciting stuff, but collecting backup is one of the main areas that we unfortunately see a lot of tax credits suffer because the proper backup wasn't pulled or saved early on in production.
yeah.
And it is extremely difficult to reach out to a crew member, a cast member, a vendor, 6, 8 months, 12 months down the line and say, hey, can you send me, 36 invoices that I don't have in my files anymore?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And I think it's why, like, w we know that preparation is the key to success for anything in life, but it couldn't be truer in production, and it's why, like, I really encourage people, regardless of where they wanna end up as a producer, to really understand the production office and understand how to work with your line producer if you're not the line producer and your accounting team, because really having that production team, which is the heartbeat of the production, having people that are super detail oriented, that are going to be going to the ends of the earth if necessary to get those backups of receipts that you're talking about, that are not going to let, a department head get away with like not having a complete petty cash report or whatever it is, like really being super picky, frankly, about having all this stuff because again, this matters. And I've been the person on those projects that someone's hitting me up a year later for documentation, for invoices, for stuff that, like, wasn't there, that should have been there, that got missed, you know? It sounds really easy, but the tricky thing is when production is moving a million miles a minute, it can be easy to go, "Oh, we'll just, we'll just get back to that. We'll just do it later. We'll just follow up next week." And then you forget because now there's a new crisis of the week to to figure out, you know? So it's
course.
super important that you are empowering your team and that you are budgeting properly. Like one of the things that has been a hard learning curve for me is often when we are tasked to back into a number production, notoriously we are the first people to cut within our own department. And often that's where you end up, like, you want to save a little bit of money on the front end by cutting a production secretary or an additional office PA or somebody in the accounting
Sure.
department that's really going to help again with this paperwork that could seem quote unquote pointless during the process, but this could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars later.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the puzzle pieces are really important with where you are making those concessions and what the consequences of those concessions are. Again, especially when you are working in these really smaller budgets where you have to be lean to even make the movie. So I have learned this lesson, like I said, the hard way of having my department be severely understaffed and the pressures and the workload that it becomes is like truly overwhelming. So word to the wise, you heard it here, like don't do that.
No, I mean, we get it. We work with producers on all types of budget sizes, but like you said, especially those smaller indie features where you're wearing a lot of hats. You're doing a
Mhm.
lot of different jobs. So it's impossible to stay on top of everything. So that's why we can't stress it enough to, lean on your production accountant, lean on a tax incentive specialist, lean on a team who knows and can give you that proper information that you're
Yeah.
going to need to complete or maintain your complete vendor files, maintain complete payroll files. I mean, some of the worst horror stories are just around such simplistic items, residency forms, copies of IDs. Some
Yeah.
states, they only allow residents wages to qualify. And if you don't have proof that that person's a resident, it's as simple as that. None of their wages qualify. I
Yeah.
mean, and time and time again, we've seen, hundreds of thousands
Georgia.
of dollars get backed out
Right.
because of improper residency forms. Um, New Jersey is a great example, not on the residency side, but on the vendor side. They require your vendors to have a business registration certificate. You don't have this for your vendor, those fees will not qualify.
Yeah.
Sounds simple, but time and time again, productions use vendors that either don't supply it or don't even have it. And that's a lot of money out of their bottom line.
Exactly, and the time to get it is before you pay the money because that's when they're incentivized to get you whatever paperwork you need, not after the
Exactly.
fact. Yes, yes. I mean,
Right.
again, it seems so obvious and so simple, and it truly is, but when it is moving that fast and you have all of these constraints, it's easy to forget this stuff. So, encourage everybody to really, like, look deeply within and really understand the value of all this stuff. But, in terms of when you're building your budget, right? Like oftentimes I think line producers can think payroll comes in so far down the line, like I'll worry about that later. But what I think is really great about GreenSlate is that, at least for me, like this openness of like, hey, I'm building a budget. Can I run this by you? Does this make sense? Are my fringes correct? Like, this is the tax. Here are the two models that I'm running for these two different states that cost compare. Like, can you make sure that everything is like buttoned up? And they will look at this for you. They will actually help you make sure everything is set up for success. You don't have to wait until you're already in real prep to get some of this stuff done. So, will you talk a little bit about like what, from your perspective, producers should be looking for when they're building their budgets, and how and when they can come to someone like you, especially with the credits, to support them?
I mean, you can reach out to GreenSlate anytime. You could have just an inkling of an idea of a project and a place that you want to shoot, and you can say, "Hey, what are the rates? What are the program highlights, tax incentive information I should know? What are the labor laws and rules?" And we have an amazing payroll team, an amazing labor team who can put all that together and provide it to you to build your budget. On the tax incentive side, there's a number of reasons that you would select a certain filming location, one over the other. But I'd say some key factors to look into when building your budget and selecting the right incentive would be: one, location. Does your project require a particular landscape, right? Do you need a big city? Do you need a desert? Do you need a beach? This could make you select one place over another. Something else that's super important is residency challenges. Not only the residency rules as it relates to the tax credit, for example, can you qualify non resident wages? But do you have any residency constraints with your cast or your ATL? Are you maybe, stuck to a certain region or a certain state? Um, Other thing is type of credit. We briefly went over the various types
Mhm.
of credits, but there's different credits that fit, your financing structure better, one over the other. So it's important to know which type of credit you may need. Um, and then I'd say the other two things to look into is really uplifts, available uplifts, and post only tax credits. So a lot of states offer uplifts if you are filming, let's say, outside of what they would call the studio zone. If you're
Mhm.
going to go to a less economically advantaged area, if you're going to hire locals, they will sometimes increase your tax credit. So you may get an additional 5 to 10% in certain areas. Diversity uplifts. So a lot of states nowadays are introducing diversity uplifts. They want to see you hiring a diverse crew, um, gender, race, and if you hit these certain diversity thresholds, you can get an additional 2 to 5 to 10%, depending on the state you
Mhm.
select. Um, and then the post only. So maybe for production, you're kind of stuck to one particular area, whether it be for your ATL cast or whether it be because you have to shoot in a desert. Um, but maybe post production can be moved to a jurisdiction that provides you a tax credit solely on your post production expenditures. In this case, states like New York or New Jersey, even Colorado, they offer incentives just for the post work, and you can maximize, how much you can get back entirely. So using both your production credit and your post production credit. Each state is different. Some cap it. So some say we have X amount of funding this year, and we can only agree to fund this many projects. And then, we can't accept any projects until the next year. Some have a rolling cap, so they will take on projects, and you may only be allocated funds for a future year, depending on when you applied for that. And then some states, they limit the amount of credit. So they say, we will not give production, over X amount of dollars. So that is also really important to look at when you are comparing your various states and the various programs to use, because you want to make sure you can get, ultimately the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings us to California, obviously, lot of conversations, a lot of movements on keeping production in the state, certainly in Los Angeles. A lot of crew, a lot of really talented people have been hurting for these last 5 years. But as we know, the way that the tax credit is set up in the state is tricky. And there's a lot of conversations and a lot of people lobbying and petitioning to try to change it. And I know they just released a list of all the different films that got selected, and it was great to see how many independent films got selected. But because California is a an application based, before you even start shooting, it definitely alienates a lot of people. And we had some lovely folks from the film commission, the California Film Commission, to talk about the process. But with the jobs ratio, it's like you have to go through this insane puzzle, you know, just to apply, and then fingers crossed, hope that you get it. And I know friends who have films that are indie set in California, love letters to Los Angeles, who have had to fight tooth or nail just to get their credit to shoot here. Um, I guess I'm curious to your thoughts on why that is. Like, why would a state set up a credit, like a state like California that is so rich and where production has been Hollywood has been the hub for so long? Why would they set up an incentive in this way? What are the benefits to the state for doing it as such? And what do you think could be a way that we circumvent and or improve rather the current way that the tax credit is offered to keep production in LA?
Um, sure. So, I think states have various reasons for how they set up their credits, but I would say the biggest one is budget. If there was unlimited amount of funds and a limited amount of projects that could obtain a tax credit, you could maybe see, the State Department budgets being gutted by these tax credits if they're not taking in as much as they should be, and they're, dishing out more than basically they're taking in. But yes, it is a shame that, like you said, California is application based. They have a lot of hoops that you have to jump through, and there's really no guarantee when you are submitting your application to
Right.
know if you will be selected or not. Um, but I think there's, great news on the horizons with the two new bills, and more recently, the updated proposal that was
Mhm.
provided that really aims at like modernizing the program, trying to keep California competitive. Um, they want to nearly double the tax credit program funding. I think this would open it up to really have additional projects, including indies, really be able to benefit from the tax incentive. Um, and more recently, they just proposed potentially upping the tax credit rate. So that means you'll get even more back, from 20 to 25% what it is today to 35%. So that's like a 10% bump. That's
That's
huge. I
huge.
think that would make California extremely competitive with the other
Yeah.
states that have been drawing a lot of production. But yeah, there's no doubt that, the tax incentives are a driving factor, I think, for production previously moving away from California. Studios are just looking elsewhere, expanding outside of California. For example, Netflix, they're investing a lot of money in New Jersey. They're set to build a massive studio there,
Yeah.
and it's happening all over the U.S. where there's really strong, stable tax incentive programs.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's interesting that, I haven't fully grasped exactly how like a tax credit program or incentive program benefits the state on an economic level, because you hear these numbers of like, oh, this show shot in this area and it generated and stimulated the local economy by X amount of dollars. And so you look at that and you go, Isn't it a no-brainer? Why would you not wanna bring production to you? Why would you not want to incentivize it in some way? And then to compare it with a state like Georgia, which has no cap, it's interesting, like, why is it that I mean, I know every state has its own jurisdiction, but, like, why is it that for one state, they're able to just, like, generate all this revenue in these tax credit programs that seems to really benefit the state, and for another, there's gotta be a cap on it because to your point, it could hinder other parts of what the government is trying to do, and it's quite complex and convoluted, certainly, and I think California being such a robust state and a rich state is probably what would I would assume, sort of make that be part of the considerations that the state has to consider. Yeah, that's redundant, but yes, part of what the state has to consider. And one thing that I find really fascinating is that even with California doubling, a lot of folks I know have said it may not still be enough to be competitive because above the line is really capped in the state, and that keeps a lot of people away. But the reality is, your above the line fees, depending on the kind of film you're doing, can be a huge portion of your budget. So if you're talking about a $50 million budget where, 25 of that is just your above the line, imagine $25 million just getting sucked up as a resource that could go to like 3 or 4 different independent films because that's going to offset above the line folks that clearly are making really good money if that's like the discretion, right, between the production budget and the above the line. So it's where it gets really tricky to make that math work for a
Mhm.
lot of producers I know. So I am curious how the state is looking to remedy that as much as possible, even if it is just putting somewhat of a cap on above the line, but not entirely capping it, giving some kind of discount. I don't know. I think there's got to be some creative ways, that they can do this because if talent wants to stay in California and makes a case for it, then the studios, financiers, producers will. And then everybody benefits from that, right? But it has to make sense for the whole.
Yeah, they have to incentivize it. And yeah, ATL, that's a big factor in a lot of states. A lot of states do cap it or limit it. A lot of states require withholding on certain types of fees,
Mhm.
and that drives more revenue to the state. So yeah, there's a number of ways, and there's a ton of studies out there who try to really capture this to figure out are these programs really working and the benefits that they provide.
Yeah.
If I had to sum it up, three things that you would need to know for your audit is A, plan ahead, B, designate a point person, and C, make sure you have easy access to your backup. Knowing the program inside and out that you're going to be applying for and understanding the needs up front is key. So, working with a well known payroll company who knows the withholding requirements, the residency requirements, the tax requirements that are needed for your cast and crew. Um, Having a strong accountant who maybe they haven't worked in that state, but who understands tax incentives as a whole, who understand that they need to tag expenses for the tax incentive and code them for qualified spend or non-qualified spend. Um, Knowing all of those things up front will, no doubt cause a smoother audit and a more efficient review process. Um, Designating a point person, this is key because, as you know, and I'm sure every other producer knows, once a production wraps, you might be on to your next project. Things may fall by the wayside. Now you're, going 100 miles per hour on another project, and you don't have enough time to really dedicate to putting together the tax incentive forms, to wrapping up and putting together all that backup. So it's really important to know who's in charge of this tax credit, once production wraps. Do we need to bring in a third party or a management team that's going to really drive this tax credit home and make sure that everything is being done as accurately and timely as possible? Um, and I mean, I can't stress this enough, but the easy access to backup. Not only making sure that throughout production you're maintaining your files properly, but making sure that those files are digital. You want to use a software that, can allow you to upload your receipts and attach them to your transaction. So when you're going to look for something, you can just quickly click on a transaction and see all the invoices and POs and check copies that are associated with it. Also, the use of Dropbox and Google Drive, having things
Yes.
really readily available and organized, right? Not just dropped in with no naming conventions, but something that's
Yeah,
organized and in a way that someone who hasn't looked at it before can go in
correct.
and pull these files. Because time and time again, horror stories also just on the timing, audits that could have easily been completed in 4 to 6 months take 8 to 12 months because you're tracking down a petty cash receipt from Starbucks or a crafty receipt from Panera. I mean, these things will hold up millions of dollars in tax credits. A $20 receipt will really hold up the
That's right.
entire audit.
Which is why there are no small jobs in production, and your runner
Exactly.
PA, who could be an entry-level person, remembering to get those receipts and
Mhm.
get them to the right person. It starts at the beginning of that chain. Like, that is a very important job. It may not feel like it in the moment, but again, this is where it can really circle back and derail, a huge part of the process and cost the production a lot of money. So super important to, like, as you're staffing, make sure again you have people that are have attention to detail that are going to keep you on point even when you are slammed doing other things within your producing team, your accounting team. It's super important. Or who gets a gold star? Have you ever had a production where you were like, whoa, these people literally did all the things? Like, who are these people, and can I get their names offline so I can hire them?
Yeah, I mean, just being a partner and being able to know what you need up front, I think those are the ones that have the gold star, the ones that continually have the files in the way that we need them, that have the information, there when we're ready for it and when we're reviewing the files. Yeah, I would
Yeah,
say. Yeah.
amazing. So, yeah, this is fantastic. I've have used GreenSlate on many, many shows since forever, it feels like, because I've been here for a long time. And it was great to learn, that you guys also have in-house accounting, that people can obviously tack on. It's not just payroll, there's incentives. You guys have a great tax incentive tool on your website, which is greenslate.com. And you can find a lot of these tools, and we'll link some of this stuff too. And you're on LinkedIn, so we'll connect.
Yeah,
We'll tag you so that people can find you and reach out to you guys as hopefully we get more and more projects set up and that we enter another boom of production. Everybody's ready for it?
we are very ready for it. No silly questions here. You can send anything our way, and we love to help.
Yes. And no show is too big or too small. And sometimes you have $2, sometimes you have $200 million. And so I think the scalability is super important. And everything we talked about applies no matter the size or the scope. It's just the amount of people you have to help you get there. So but this is fantastic. Thank you so much. I will link all of the things so people can find you and ask questions directly. And I can't wait for all these gold star producers that are going to be coming your way after listening to this episode.
Uh,
So thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
no, thank you so much. It's great.